Hey guys, Mike here from Sell Your Service, and I'm with customer, colleague, friend, Warren Munitz from Integrative Coaching. Warren, how you doing?
I'm good, thanks, Mike. Thanks for having me.
No, not at all. Thanks for coming on board. So typically on this podcast, we talk about business strategies, marketing, a lot of automation, email copy, that kind of stuff. But with your background, I really wanted to focus on a different area. I really want to talk about stress, predominantly around individuals as business owners, because sometimes we only work by ourselves, but even as a business owner, it's quite a lonely role in some respect. Just to kind of kick us off, what would you say are some of the biggest, or maybe one big misconception about either dealing with stress or how we cope with it?
I would say one of the biggest misconceptions is that most people actually think they can cope with it.
Interesting. Okay.
That they have coping mechanisms. A lot of people will use sports or drinking or some kind of method of distraction. And if you think about it, that's like, it's like how you treat a baby.
Yeah.
You know, the baby's crying, you're like, yeah, the keys. And you're like,
yeah,
you're an adult now. And is it possible that we're missing a secret dimension to what stress actually is?
Yeah.
Is it possible that there is a way that we can tap into the power of the unconscious mind, which is where stress gets created,
right,
and harness it? So yeah.
So say that again. So use stress, and you said what stress actually is there? Something to do with the unconscious?
So so stress is basically the fight or flight response.
Huh. Okay.
Stress is, and if you turn that into, that's our survival instinct, right? So in comes a saber-toothed tiger, and you can either run away or fight, whichever you, in that moment, most people respond first with one or the other. That's their go-to, right? But this comes up in our daily lives, and we don't have to fend off saber-toothed tigers anymore.
Yeah.
Yet we look at life in the same way still, as this unconscious instinct forces us to do so. So unless we learn to harness this animal inside, we end up still playing this old game, right, of being a caveman, a cavewoman. And so is it possible that at one level we needed to do that, but at another level, this force in us is actually it can be refined? So for example, if you look at stress, if you look at the fight or flight response as an emotion, you would go, well, the fight is anger, and the fight is fear. Sorry, the flight is fear. So, well, that comes up in our conversations around relationships, money, all kinds of things. So is it possible that we can transform those into higher states?
That's very interesting. Part of the reason I like doing these is because I essentially get free consultation or free therapy. So, because the biggest thing I see, particularly as single person business owners or entrepreneurs or whatever, is there's kind of two types of I'm not very good with the terminology, so you might have to kind of unpick this. There's kind of two types of stress. There's stuff that's constantly going in the background, like my bills, payments, and stuff that I'm constantly aware of. And then there's an emergency that happens day to day, like where a website breaks. Do people cope with them in the same way? Does that, people say, oh, it's adding to my stress levels? This is something I've always been kind of fascinated about.
So I'm not sure if this is going to answer that, but if we look at most people learn how to deal with stress through their parents.
Yep.
How my mom and dad deals with their own anger is how I learn to deal with it. And that's not by what they say, it's by how they literally are when they're stressed.
Yeah.
So if my dad is violent or becomes reclusive when he gets stressed, then that's what I will learn to do. So if you go, well, this is just adding to my stress, then we're talking about it's more than likely the model or the mindset that you've learned as a child. This is just adding to my stress. But what happens if actually everything here, everything in this reality right now is designed and waiting for you to utilize it so that you can literally achieve your ultimate desire? Then how would you look at those things?
Interesting. And that, I think, that leads into a very difficult question, because I think a lot of the time people don't even know what they would maybe utilize that for. Am I on the right lines there?
Right, exactly. So when you start to consider this idea, right, of utilizing everything towards achieving your goal, even things that seem contrary, right? You go, okay, well, if you, or when you go to gym, when you go exercise and you push weights, that's the adversary. The weight is literally doing the opposite of what you want to do. But without that weight, you don't build muscle. Right? It's the same as if you think about a flight of stairs. If your goal is to get to the top flight, you don't look at the stairs and go, oh my God, this obstacle is way too much. I can't do it. Every step is helping you and supporting you get to where you want to get to, right?
Yeah.
So changing your mindset is one part of it. You've got to start to look at everything, how everything can lead you towards your goal. The other part of it is that while that's okay to do mentally and to think about mentally while we don't have the feeling of stress, the other part, which is the fundamental part, is to learn how to actually experience and transform something that feels bad, wrong, negative, and transmute it into positivity. And that means you have to stay in that position of being positive to the thing that's happening.
Yeah. So, okay. So obviously we've been working quite closely together, and, you know, I watch your YouTube content, I read your blogs. A lot of it comes back to, particularly around the stress side of it, because you've got a few of the guides, and I'll make sure to link them below on dealing with stress. A lot of them, you use these terms like transform and transmute consistently. A lot of stress guides, or whatever advice I guess we're given even as kids, is about stopping the stress and stopping it, as opposed to transforming it, right?
Right. Exactly.
Why do people teach that? Why is it wrong? And what should we do in 20 minutes? What should we do instead then?
So I think really it's a matter of learning that was their language at the time. And it's not that what they're saying is wrong. It's that, you know, as we refine this kind of idea of consciousness or self-realization and mastery of stress, we also refine the language we use. So there is the Buddha who, you know, meditates and finds enlightenment, and he says, this is all an illusion. And that was his version of it. But, you know, who understood that?
Yeah.
So maybe this is more just about learning how to engage or become aware of the different dimensions and aspects of our own psyche and how we relate to that. And just the language of, well, oh, this is what he means by that. So stop the stress. Who knows what he meant by that?
Yeah.
But my experience is that if you had to become aware of an emotion that you don't like, and if you can point to that emotion being outside of your body, then I go, okay, well, then it's something we could stop.
So we become aware of the emotion that we don't like, and that's predominantly the fight or flight, the fear, anger.
It can be anything, right? It can be sad, it can be anger, fear, shame.
Okay.
Whatever it is.
And then identify that outside. How do I do that?
Well, so the thing is, you can't.
Right. Right. Okay.
Right. It's in you. And so if you don't like it, what are you saying? Really?
Yeah.
You don't like yourself.
I don't like myself. Yeah.
Right. So can you overcome that judgment towards yourself? Have compassion towards that part of yourself. If that part of yourself was your child that was feeling angry or feeling sad or feeling scared, how would you treat that part? So let's say that part of yourself was feeling scared, right? Stressed, you feel scared. There's the little scared child. What would you do? You just abandon the child? No. If your child was feeling scared, you'd come down, you'd bend, you'd hug him or her. And in that moment, while they might still be feeling that fear, and you might be listening to them crying, and it's painful to listen to a baby crying, you don't leave them there. You enforce that you are there and that it's going to be okay. And by doing that, you start to contain an energy which is just feeling uncontained. That's all that emotion really is. It's energy that is, or an emotion that's uncontained. And if you can contain it, like if you start to hold that, what happens? You don't think that part of you wants what you want? You don't think that that part of you wants the best for you? Of course it does.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. And it's interesting because when you look at, if you interview or talk to people who say they are stressed or dealing with stress or pressure or whatever they want to call it, and people who seemingly have or would have a lot of stress and pressure, is therefore the difference between them, like you say, this ability to be compassionate towards themselves, to understand, even just be able to actually recognize what's happening. Because I look at people like, I don't know, Mark Cuban, and I'm like, he must be stressed like 24 hours a day. And you talk to him and he's actually like, no, I have all these ways of being able to people to help me and things like that. And yeah, I've got people in our kind of, similar to our positions, who are running much smaller businesses, who seem to be just on the verge of breaking every single day. And part of that then is that recognition.
So exactly, right? So the guys or the girls and women and people who are at that level of their game, it's not that they're not dealing or feeling stressed.
Yeah.
It's stress. You know, it just changes. So it goes, and maybe the things that were unconscious, they've dealt with in a certain way. Some people are successful without dealing with it. You know, I don't know, maybe there are other lessons then coming. But I have CEOs and guys who are at really in stressful positions and jobs that don't know how to deal with it always, that do need help. But as we dig deeper, some people, as I said earlier, you know, like you're born with a certain default. Your parents become your default.
Right.
And if they've learned to deal with stress, you default to that way.
Yeah.
Mostly, if we generalize. And so you don't have to deal with that because it's just happening unconsciously. But what happens when that gets to its limit? Then the way that you've unconsciously been coping starts to come up into that crisis or that moment of, wait, I need a hand, help me. That's
very interesting. And I think particularly as individual businesses or entrepreneur, I don't really like the word entrepreneur, but individual business owners, we're very isolated. So we don't even have a view of how other people deal with pretty much the same things that happen: tax, lack of revenue, pissed off customers. Typically, those are the big three. And if we only see, like you say, ourselves dealing with it, then we only have perhaps our parents or whoever kind of raised us to default to, as opposed to being able to see how other people do deal with that. Because like you said, presumably everyone's dealing with those same stress factors.
Yeah, everyone's dealing with it. And it's not, I mean, what happens when there's more people in the organization? That you're just almost amplified. You amplify your own relationship dynamics.
Yeah.
Like all of a sudden, what was unconscious is now Sally. You know, Jeff. And you're now dealing with this thing which was previously unconscious and inside of you. It's still unconscious. You just now think it's Jeff or, you know, Jerry.
Yeah.
Yeah. He's really grinding me today. But what that does allow for, again, with the right attitude, with the right kind of mindset, is to look at that and go, what is that trigger in me?
Yeah.
And bring it up to awareness so that you can start to process it. Because the moment you do, that dynamic changes. And when you're able to do that, you also are able to not only get the best out of yourself, but you're able to get the best out of everyone else. You know, like, so it's almost leading from behind, but in a way, it means you're leading by going first.
Yeah. That's I want to come a little bit on to actually, okay, so let's, how can we start dealing with that? How can we begin to transmute that, as you've talked about, and transform it? But I want to just go back a bit. You and I've had some fascinating conversations, and kind of writing up your email copy, I'm like, who is this guy? How did you get to where you are now? Like, where does integrative coaching come from? How did Warren become Warren today?
That's a whole long story. How long do you have?
Yeah, the abridged version. Yeah.
Okay. So I think everything comes out of necessity, you know, and my journey into this wasn't just like one day I was like, oh, I want to become a life coach. I came out of a space of really dark depression and anxiety for most of my childhood, and without the right tools and without the right support, and I had to almost get to that rock bottom where, and I actually talk about this in the book that we've talked about, where, you know, I'm looking over the edge and thinking to myself, you know, this is not worth it. Like, what's the point? And that space, I think, it was a catalyst into me starting to search for, is there a better way to be here? You know, is there a better way to deal with my emotions? Because, you know, I felt manipulated the whole time. I felt at the whim of every emotion. Yeah. And so that journey led me to India, led me all around the world, where I started to learn how to, you know, from teachers and from, you know, just bumping my head up against the wall, how to master this state of being, you know, called being. And that led to, I actually had a yoga school before this, and it was more like leaning to more the meditation side, which transformed into integrative coaching as it is now.
Interesting.
And I think that was merely because I wasn't ready to step into the direct space of going, this is how, you know, you need to deal with this. I was like, no, do this yoga pose. Yeah. And it'll bring you peace of mind. Yeah. Instead of going, let's deal with what's going on. How are you seeing this situation, or you know, how you're seeing yourself?
And that's, and again, I'll link to Warren's YouTube series below. A big theme that comes, I don't even know if theme is the right word, that comes up again and again and again, and certainly from a lot of the books and guys that I read, and you and I have talked about, is that it's very different to try and change your environment compared to actually looking internally and saying, why does that piss me off or upset me or stress me out? And I think a lot of people focus on changing their environment as opposed to working on internally, right?
Right. So what you're talking now is like, this is the secret sauce.
Right. Okay.
You literally get this. Yeah. You really get this. It'll literally change your reality in an instant, because the moment you realize that reality isn't outside of you, then you step into this different kind of ballpark. Yeah. You see a different way of playing. So considered, you know, right, as we were talking, it's just me and you, right? Now, right now, how many realities are there? And so you question.
Yeah, I mean.
How many realities are there? And if we could say, well, let's say we couldn't identify an absolute reality, we would say, well, there's two realities.
Right.
Okay, and we have this general consensus. So we go like, okay, but the fact that there's two realities means that, well, who's defining them? And if I'm not defining my reality, then if it was just the two of us, then you would be defining mine as well.
Yeah.
So is it possible to take charge over your own version of reality? And the more you take ownership, the more you take responsibility for that. Yeah, exactly. Raise your hand. And the more power you start to bring back to yourself, instead of being in that state of, it's the government, it's this, it's whatever, it's someone else, it's always someone else. The moment you start taking that power back, you realize, wait a minute, but reality is actually happening inside of you. Because, and you could prove this. When you see what you're seeing a reflection of light just from a visual point of view. You're seeing a reflection of light bouncing in through your eyes, and then your brain is actually processing it into the image that you apprehend as reality.
Right.
That means outside of you is already the past.
Interesting.
Right?
Yeah.
It's already the past. So you can't change that. So if you consider that, use a projector for a moment, that the idea of perception is projection, is that you're actually projecting reality outside. That you just think it's outside. And so if you think it's outside and you can't have any control over it, then you can't, because you think it's outside of you. But if you realize it's inside of you, but it's in you, right?
Yeah.
So you have control over, even if you don't have control over the feeling that it's there now and you have to deal with it. Yeah. But it's in you, so it's yours. You either own that or you're going to be in conflict with it for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
And you can't really bury anything. Did I go? I feel like I went right.
No. This is good. This is really good. And it's interesting because we do a lot of, we do talks on split testing and automation and stuff like this. But something I'm finding more and more common, particularly amongst a lot of my students and my audience, is talking about this stuff. It allows us to break outside and, frankly, if we're being honest, play a bigger game than just the business, right? Yeah. It's about raising our own standards and saying it's beyond just having a website company or a marketing company. What is it that I'm going to push out to the universe and begin experiencing? And I think a lot of the time, and I'd be interested for your take on this, I think a lot of the reasons that people are unable to do that is predominantly based around what they are worried their parents or other people will say is either thinking above your station or it's the wrong goal. And so we never do really challenge ourselves to look internally, because surely that's in their mind or our mind, that's the way it's always been. And it's very difficult to make that shift. But I see a lot of business owners wanting to make that shift.
Yeah. I think it's actually quite a complex point that you brought up, because right. if you think about even certain cultural or religious beliefs and ideologies that people grow up with, which is respect your parents, does that mean you don't question what they've learned from their parents and their parents and their parents and their parents, and off you go generations. And if you put this authority somewhere outside of you, then you might never question anything. And I can't remember now who, is it the unexamined life?
I don't know that.
I can't remember if it's Socrates or
right.
Plato, but the unexamined life is not worth living. So this is to question, not disrespectfully, but just to question certain ways of seeing the world. And what you said when you started this conversation about what do you want to push out there, and who are we more than the business? which is, I mean, that comes down to purpose. Like, why are you here?
Mm-hmm.
And if you are ready to play in that bigger game where you're going, I'm bringing this to the world.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now you're definitely playing in that next level.
Yeah.
Because you have a purpose for being here. You're not just making websites.
Yeah. And I think that's, to me, is a big indicator of what you're able to deal with stress-wise.
Exactly.
Right. I think if people who have got this bigger game plan, the letters and stuff that come through from the bank or whatever, you're like, fine, I'll deal with that. But in a bizarre way, and again, I don't know this. So it was interesting. You talked earlier about exercise and coping mechanisms.
Yeah.
I realized that I was frankly working out way too much. And it actually made me quite sick in the end. I was 7 days a week. I wasn't going to the gym. I was running or I was doing something, and it made me really sick. And when you are ill and incapacitated, you have a lot more time to think about stuff. And I was like, actually, the thing that was really stressing me out was, well, in this particular case, it was this legal case that we've got going on, which is fine. It's kind of all blown aside now, but it was interesting that I was almost distracting myself with those other activities when really, if I looked at it and went, perspective wise, it's not that big a deal compared to my bigger purpose. Am I even pointing in the right direction there? Or?
It is, but the key is to go, there's a reason why that thought, are you avoiding it, right? There's a specific reason why you're avoiding it. And if you look at it and you go like, and this is the feeling component part, right? So I said you could have the right thought, but the feeling component is the work. You have to process this emotion. You have to hold it. You have to contain it. So if you had a look at it, and with every emotion, with every layer, there is a thought that's connected to it. So if you don't mind me using that example, so here's this court case, and you go, okay, well, what's the stress? Like, what's the worst case scenario?
You want me to answer now? Or?
No.
Right, I see, okay.
What's the worst case scenario, and go there.
Yep.
Actually go there.
Yeah.
And don't excuse it. Don't go, oh, that'll never happen. Go to your absolute bottom of the barrel, worst case. Yeah. The whole world ends. Okay, man. And what emotion is there? You will find there is a fundamental experience, self-preservation, fear, whichever one it is.
Yeah.
More than likely, it's always fear. Because it's the most vulnerable, right? So if you go to that level of vulnerability, you go like, oh, okay, so that's key to this experience of being, life and death. This experience of being right now is that balance of that razor edge of live and dead.
Yeah.
And the experience of that is terrifying. And if you can become aligned with that reality, because it is a reality, and if you're not connected to it, what are you distracting yourself from, and why? Why would you distract yourself from such a powerful force? It's yours. Liberate yourself with it.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And I think, and this is and I think it's partly our like Western education system, is we're very focused on like tactics and
strategy.
Just we've got to do stuff. You've got to do stuff all the time, otherwise you're not a valuable member of society. Then when we see kids and teenagers committing suicide over exams and stuff, I'm like, there's like nothing in the world. I see people crying after work, and I'm like, there is literally no job in the world worth that level of horror. And I think we're almost looked down upon if you do decide to say, actually, I want to look at this and say, why is this a big deal, and realize it's not. It's almost like we're expected, and we should be stressed about a lot of these things. Particularly as a business owner, people say, well, if you're not stressed about it, you don't care about it.
Yeah, I don't know if that's true.
No, I don't think it's true at all. But I think we're often taught that. I think we have this perception, particularly again at school, that if you're not stressed about something, you don't care about it.
I think you can. You say we're in this mindset of having to do stuff all the time, and I don't know if I watched, with my fiance, I've started watching this series called The Crown.
Oh yeah, yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
So far it's brilliant.
Yeah.
In my mind. Anyway, but one of the biggest things is this ideal that she portrays as the crown. The crown in Kabbalah, the Kabbalistic philosophy of the crown, is the top of the tree of life, right? It's the will. Right. And this part is actually like beyond human. So it's you can't get to this part. There is no way of defining it, however, other than will or crown. But one of the biggest things she keeps saying is that's the hardest thing, to do nothing. Now, doing nothing doesn't mean sleeping. That's sleeping. That's that ability to do nothing. So a thought comes in. Can you do nothing with it? Or do you react to it? An emotion comes up. Can you do nothing with it? Or do you react?
Yeah.
Can you be there? You know? Or do you turn away? So I think that, you know, yeah, I see these things in all things, you know. Yeah. But I think that if you could learn to do nothing, that skill, instead of what you've been taught, which is always be busy, like if you're not with idle hands, rubbish.
Yeah.
It's just you know, and it's just a matter of learning a different skill.
Interesting. And a big part of that is allowing people to even, which is why, you know, channels and content like yours exists, is to even show people that there actually is
a different way,
you know. And a lot of the time I think we're shown, if you want to cope with stress, what you want to do is go for a walk, drink more water, and fine, to an extent, I'm sure those, you know, are valuable, whatever. But actually, if you don't deal with essentially what is causing cancer inside you, right?
Exactly.
You know, it
There's
keeps
no
growing.
amount of water is going to do anything.
Yeah.
Have a balanced life, absolutely. Deal with the foundation, absolutely. Eat healthy, exercise, drink water, sleep well. Okay, but now the next level, like actually do the work. Because without that, you will stay at that base level. There's no way out. The only way out is through this experience.
Yeah.
There was a book called, or it's a Buddhist saying, I think, The Wisdom of No Escape.
Right.
Which is surrender, not quit, but surrender to this level, which requires you to, you know, be open. Stop. You can't hide anymore.
Yeah.
You have to deal. You have to face this thing that's coming up for you, right? You can exercise or sleep as much as you want, but it's not going to change.
And I like the analogy you used of the staircase.
Yeah.
To get to the second floor, the first floor, the staircase, we now go, well, that's how we would get there. But most of the time we see that as the obstacle.
Yeah.
To
and
kind
you're
of
crying about it, right?
Right.
You know about the stairs.
Yeah.
These stairs.
Fascinating, man. This has been awesome, and I'm really glad we got to talk like this, because I've been meaning to have you on for ages. And it's just, again, you know, I read a lot of your content, obviously, because we work together a lot, and it's interesting to me how, because you some of your stories and things you talk about go back even thousands of years, and we kind of think that we're a smarter culture now. We're like the smartest we've ever been. And a lot of this stuff people have been talking about for a long time.
Thousands of years. I mean, you know, there's I think there's a series on Netflix called The Pyramid Girl or something. They talk about in Hindu philosophy, I actually talk about the yugas, the different ages, and the Mayan calendars talk about the 26,000 year cycle.
Okay.
And actually the cycle we're in is like just coming out of the darkness.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, you know, there is this idea, and I think it's the arrogance of it, the immature ego, which is, we know we know it all. We're so technically advanced.
Yeah.
I mean, look around. Suicide. 800,000 people a
Yeah.
year committing suicide. There's nothing advanced about it. But we're getting through it, and we're starting to speak about it, and slowly, this slight shift and openness, and people wanting to live more of their passion or more of what they have, dug in the dirt for, to now become,
that's a good point. Yeah,
stepping into the light, that is, or stepping in upwards.
Yeah,
I think where we are.
Awesome, man. How can people reach out to you? How can they get more? How can they get in contact?
Well, I mean, just stick my website, integrativecoaching.co.za. You can even go. We've got a teachable site where you can download our meditation course. It's integrativecoachingacademy.co.za. If you can just put those details in the comments or something.
Yeah, we'll put all the links below, and obviously we'll link your YouTube channel as well. Thank you so much for coming on, Warren. We'll catch up. We're actually catching up tomorrow, so I'll speak to you tomorrow.
Yes. Fantastic. Thanks so much, Mike.
No worries. Thanks, mate.